program for today. Dr. Sherif Amer, the Professor of Geopolitical Affairs and the International Relations. Doctor, we were speaking just before the break and you said that it was not easy for Egypt to be maintaining the foreign relations, especially at the times of conflict, for example, or at the times of the COVID-19, as we did witness in 2019 and 2020, as we did see over the past 3 or 4 years. How do you think Egypt has managed to do that specifically, to be maintaining balanced relations, especially at times of conflicts?
Well, I'll give you the example, for example, the Israeli and Arab-Israeli conflict, when always there was this clash, violent clash between Gaza and Israel, Hamas movement and Israel. The Egyptian mediation was present immediately with our intelligence service heading to Tel Aviv and heading to Gaza to maintain the ceasefires. And we managed with huge success to avoid bloodshed. We have seen in previous years the war between both sides used to go on for months. Now, once it starts in 72 hours and the Egyptian mediation calms everything down.
Yes.
So this is a huge success that no one, I think, is capable of doing it because we have this balance that you said about. We have the contacts with the Gaza people, we have the contacts with Israel, we have the contacts with Washington, Moscow, with everyone. And we had another obstacle, is that there were forces interfering inside this conflict, trying to ignite the conflict, like Iran, supporting the Islamic Jihad. So at that time, we had to also convince the Palestinians that you have to listen to your own voice, not to other people's voice.
Yes.
When we call them to unite, it's the Arab voice. We're not talking about Egypt's voice only. We want them to be secure, to be united. This one of the main issues that we have reached a huge success. Then we have seen how things went terribly wrong in Libya.
Yes.
And at that time, we maintained one line that we support Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar at the time with the army, the national army. There were factions everywhere. At that time when NATO bombed Libya, arms were in the hands of terrorist groups. There were smuggling of illegal immigrants, smuggling of the oil. It was a failed state. We were criticized by many people why we chose to support the army, in the national army. We said because this is the national army of the state.
Yes.
And now what Libya, it's fragile. We're not saying that everything is beautiful there. It's very fragile now. But at least, the civilians are not paying the price now. Maybe there are disputes between the factions, disputes between the politicians, but at the end, the people are just living in calm. It has to be rebuilt again, Libya. And then we had the problem, of course, of Sudan, with Amer al-Bashir, who was ousted, and then we had to gather all of them here in Egypt and convince them that they have to have the dialogue and the transition period, and unfortunately what happened again. One of the main problems, as you mentioned, the COVID-19,
yes.
And this was a huge blow up to every country in the world, especially the developing countries who wanted to go on with their economic developments. At that time, Egypt was trying to guarantee the security, the sanitary security of the people, the health security of the people, and at the same time keep the economy going on. It was a challenge. It was a huge challenge because we didn't know how to do it immediately with the fatalities happening everywhere.
Yes.
And the world is closing. Europe closed its stores, the West closed its stores, China, and every country had to sustain its own ways of combating the pandemic. We managed to survive. Many people thought that this would be the end of the economy, but unfortunately it didn't happen. And then we have now the Ukrainian-Russian conflict.
Yes.
It has numerous challenges: the gas, the grains, the geopolitical situation in this region, the energy crisis, and how the Gulf states decided not to listen to Washington for the first time in decades, which changed the whole regime. Now that we are facing a new map, we have a new possibilities of alliances with China, with Russia. Countries like Egypt and Arab countries wish to join the BRICS. And lately, Iran joined the Shanghai Commission. So we have, the world is changing. How could a country like Egypt maintain all this balance? It's very difficult, especially that you have the Suez Canal, you have the access also in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. You have to ensure your own security at Bab el-Mandab Strait. So it's the whole geopolitical challenge is very serious. That's why we are maintaining our defense policies strong to defend our interest.
And Doctor, more recently and more specifically, you mentioned the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. An African delegation headed there with a representation of Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli on behalf of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, heading to Ukraine, trying to find a solution as well. What does this say about the weight of Egypt in Africa and for the globe, in global conflicts, as we can see?
Well, it didn't only start by that. It started also by the visit of the Polish President Duda, who came to Egypt and tried to urge Egypt to take the side, anti-Russian side. So that means that even countries like Poland and even countries in the Western Bloc wanted to have Egypt position in their side. So Egypt was very clear from day one of the conflict: we want peace, we want negotiations. We urge all these peace initiatives. That's why Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli was sent by President Sisi to Moscow and then to Kiev, hopefully to find a solution. But unfortunately, we all know that there are some forces, superpowers, who do not wish to see this happening, and they are fueling, in a way or another, the conflict. So I think that we didn't lose hope, because we all know on the long term everyone will pay the price. It will not only be Ukraine or Russia or the United States, or everyone. We will pay the price economically and strategically, and we cannot handle that. We have to find peace and a way to find the end of this war.
On the other hand, another important topic, which is the refugees. Millions of refugees are located here in Egypt, and more specifically from Sudan. For example, about 110,000 Sudanese refugees or citizens have crossed from Sudan into Egypt after the recent conflict back there. How do you see this important file, and how Egypt has responded to the situation that we have right now, is that we have millions of refugees on Egyptian soil?
Well, it's a huge challenge, because we all know that the country pays, these people live with us, and with all the Egyptians, so they have to be sustained by the state. What is really difficult is that when we had, for example, the Syrian refugees, now the Syrian conflict is being resolved. You have countries like Turkey. They're using violent methods to push them back, although they were supporting the Turkish regime and they were friends. But now they're telling them economically, we cannot afford to host you. You have to go back immediately. And there are some racist and nationalistic chauvinist acts against them. That's not the case in Egypt at all. We have the Syrians, the Sudanese, and Ethiopians, and Iraqis, and Yemenis, and we put aside all national sentiments, all economic difficulties. We never told them, you have to go back. If not, you will pay a heavy price here. You won't live in security as other countries did.
Yes.
We never bargained the West with this card. We never told them, blackmail them, telling them, well, we will let all these people take boats and go to you if you will not pay us. Turkey did that at a certain time.
Yes.
So I think that we are having this burden silently because this is our tradition. Egypt wants to have good relations with all these countries. If we host the people of these countries, afterwards they will always have good memories. They will say, we will being treated here. Many of them will say, we grow up in Egypt,
yes.
not harassed, not beaten, not imprisoned, but we grow up in this secure environment.
How do you think the conflict in Sudan could be negatively impacting the talks regarding the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam between Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia?
Well, it already harmed the talks because we have seen, unfortunately, the Ethiopian government from day one, they started saying and emphasizing, of course, is the Ethiopian government. The people, they are living here in Egypt in peace and we have no problems with them. We have no problems with the economic development of Ethiopia. We have only problems about our sovereignty, about the water, according to the international law.
Yes.
So I think that when they decided to stop the talks because there is no solution in Sudan, of course it was a pretext, an excuse to not to go on with these kind of mediations and talks. I think that at a certain time Egypt will give a red light to everyone in the international community that we will not let the Ethiopian government use the cover of this conflict to harm our water interests and water sovereignty. We would not let it happen. Many think that it's always the military options. No, we never said so. We are just saying that we will defend our security and our sovereignty, and we know how to do it. Egypt has multiple choices. We can use them anytime we want.
Yes, Doctor, heading to the second report of the daily debate for tonight, which comes from the bilateral relations between Egypt and the European Union, decades of cooperation and partnership. More details in the upcoming report, so stay tuned.
Egypt and Europe are bound by history and geography. The European Union and Egypt both have a long-lasting relationship and will continue to expand cooperation on basis of partnership and joint commitment. Egypt and Europe are working on an ambitious and innovative new agenda based on the conviction that by working together and in a spirit of partnership, common challenges can be turned into opportunities. On a bilateral level, the jointly agreed partnership priorities aim to address common challenges to promote joint interests and guarantee long-term stability on the two sides of the Mediterranean. The partnership priorities are guided by shared commitment to the universal values and to reinforce cooperation in support of Egypt's Sustainable Development Strategy, Vision 2030. This partnership includes support to Egypt's sustainable economic and social development, good governance, the rule of law, human rights, migration, security, counter-terrorism, and cooperation in foreign policy through intensified consultations on regional and international issues. Egypt and the EU have been moving forward, engaging on shared priorities under their association agreement, which was signed in 2001 and entered into force in 2004. The association agreement established a free trade area (FTA) between the EU and Egypt by removing tariffs on industrial products and making agricultural products easier to trade. The EU is Egypt's most important trade partner, accounting for 25% of the country's total trade. Bilateral trade in goods has almost tripled since the FTA entered into force, growing from 8.6 billion euros in 2003 to 24.5 billion euros in 2020. Egypt mostly exports to the EU fuels and mining products, chemicals, and agricultural products. The EU is also the leading investor in Egypt with accumulated investment stock of 38.8 billion euros, representing around 39% of the country's total foreign direct investment. Egypt remains the second biggest recipient of EU FDI in the Middle East and North Africa region. The European Union and Egypt are continuously working on improving trade and investment relations in order to foster mutually beneficial development and growth.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate. Dr. Sherif Amer, as we did see in the past report, the bilateral relations between Egypt and the European Union over decades of cooperation and development. How do you think those bilateral relations have developed over the past 10 years?
As we said at the beginning,
Yes.
the relations with the EU was very tense because
Yes.
they didn't accept Egypt's path towards democracy, and this was for two reasons. The think tanks they have in the West used to, I lived there at that time in the academic field, and they used to tell the people there that, they give reports, the think tanks that Egypt, what happened in Egypt is not a democratic choice and all that, so it was false information. Add to that the mainstream media, it was also against us. So we had to rebuild our public relations again.
Yes.
We had to speak about ourselves again. We never forget also the help of our friends and brothers in the Gulf states. They helped us in that. But Egypt had to do it also by itself. And at that time, the EU was measuring and balancing several things. They want a stable country in the Middle East. No one was stable at that time except Egypt. They wanted a reliable ally who would not blackmail them like it happened with Turkey. It was Egypt. They wanted a country which will preserve the calm between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It was Egypt. So they started to think that why not accepting the vision of the Egyptian people? Why not listen to the leadership in Egypt? Why not to invest in Egypt? And they started, Germany started by that, and the British. And then we have seen the Rafale sent to Egypt. They never sell these arms, sophisticated arms, to countries who are not welcomed in there. So they welcomed us at that time. This was positive signs. And there was a huge problem for the Europeans. It was the illegal immigration. Boats were flooding from Libya, from Syria, from everywhere towards Europe, towards Italy. And Italy used to push them to France, and France pushed them back to Italy. It was a chaos inside the EU. Egypt had a strong navy, and we have the best navy in the Mediterranean now. We defended all these interests. We told them we will work together under one condition: respect Egypt's sovereignty. And this is what happened, and then the relations began to develop.
Yes, and finally, how do you see the fields of cooperation for the future, as we have spoken about the achievements that we have had internally and externally, more specifically about the foreign policy file under His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri ever since 2014. How do you see the next 10 years in terms of cooperation with the European Union, with the African continent, and for the rest of the world in this file in general?
Well, we are witnessing now the de-dollarization, as people are calling like that. The dollar now is being fragile because many are seeking to make deals, many countries, with their own currencies, like the yuan, the Chinese yuan, and the Russian ruble. And people are trying to, investors trying to flee this pressure of the dollar. I think this would change tremendously the relations, international relations. Once we will be free from one currency, we will have our own freedom to trade with our own currencies. This will change many things. I think Europe will, Western Europe, of course, will get to the conclusion that a country like Egypt, who stated that we have to be balanced and have a position clear about the conflict now, this was the right thing to do, because they're losing a lot economically, and we are losing also, but because we are all in the same boat. But we have the right vision. Endorsing war is not an option.
Yes, Dr. Sherif Amer, the Professor of Geopolitical Affairs and the International Relations, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Anytime. And this brings us to the end of the daily debate for tonight. I will be leaving you, however, with the latest presidential activities of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in the past week in the upcoming report. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi received a phone call from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Ahmed Fahmy, spokesperson for the presidency, stated the call dealt with ways to enhance the distinguished bilateral relations between Egypt and Germany in all fields. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi received a phone call from Mrs. Giorgia Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy. Ahmed Fahmy, spokesperson for the presidency, stated the call included mutual praise for the historically distinguished relations between the two friendly countries, in addition to the existing cooperation to address many challenges in the Mediterranean region. Egypt followed with great interest the results of the presidential elections in the sister country of Sierra Leone, which resulted in President Julius Maada Bio winning a second presidential term. In this regard, Egypt congratulated His Excellency on his re-election as the President of Sierra Leone following an electoral process that reflects the level of awareness of the brotherly Sierra Leonean people and affirms its support for His Excellency in continuing work to achieve the aspirations and hopes of his people. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi held a phone call with the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Ahmed Fahmy, spokesperson for the presidency, stated that President congratulated the Greek Prime Minister on the great electoral victory achieved by the ruling party in the parliamentary elections that took place last June.